is, and this actually applies, I think, to Grace and Gabby too, when their summer activities, is that if you haven't already, you need to be thinking about what you're going to do this summer. Right? So you should be trying to do something like an internship or a research experience. You should not be trying to do something like, contracting work, even if it pays more money. Right now, you should be thinking about doing something related to engineering this summer. And the reason for that is because you need to be developing professionally. That's what's going to have the big payoff later on. So that's more important to be doing something that's developing you as an engineering professional in the summers, even if you're currently a freshman, than it is to be, working lots and lots of hours, growing grass and make a lot of money. Okay, so one of the things that you could do this summer is you could work here at St. Francis on a research activity. If you want to do that, if that interests you, you need to, really the time to have started working on lining up the funding was like a couple of weeks ago, because one of the main sources of funding, there was a letter of intent due to today. But we could probably still, if you are interested in working with somebody here, you can probably still come up with funding from some source or another, if that's of interest to you. But if that's of interest to you, you should talk to a faculty member as soon as possible, right? So that's the reason. So that's the background. My research is all related to environmental kinetics. So that means how fast chemical reactions occur, and these would be chemical reactions that have something to do with environmental systems. So here's some data, typical types of data that I would deal with. So these are concentrations of some kind of chemical in a laboratory environment going down, and then some kind of product going up. And a couple of spins on what I do or what my interests are related to these types of data. One is to try to extract information from these data by making models and fitting them through those data, extract information that we can then apply to real environmental systems. So these particular data happen to have something to do with contaminant transformations on zero-valent iron, which I'll talk about some more. And there's an environmental application of that to treating groundwater. So some of the time I'm trying to figure out what can we say based on experimental data about how engineered systems will behave in order to accomplish an goal. Other times, though, I'm trying to extract from these data mechanistic information about the chemical reactions that are going on. So this is like more like engineering. This is a little bit more like science. But the reason to do the science is in my case, to have this mechanistic understanding so that we can ultimately apply it to coming up with better remediation strategies or heading off unexpected problems that might develop in the You probably know this, but I rely on math and computation predominantly in my research. So when I sit down to do research, it's not usually in the laboratory. It's usually on a piece of paper at the computer. So here's two recent papers of mine. So this is a paper, and you're not expected to read this, but just you note there's block equations. And then over here, there's another paper, and my part of the paper, this paper, is putting these lines on it, putting these curves on it. That involves the computer. Somebody else collects the data, so I work together with people. Now, for students, a lot of times you might be more interested in collecting data, and if that is of interest to you, but you still are interested in the types of things I'm working on, you can still be involved with me in some way. You just have to make sure that the experiment is simple enough so that I can understand what you're doing and give you good advice. So I'm going to talk about 3 projects that I'm working on right now. These sort of 3 areas. One is something called sulfidization, got an A in there, of nano zero-valent iron. Another one is limestone dissolution in acid mine drainage, and the third one is surface fractal formation under chemical weathering frogs. And in each case, I'll try to give like a brief little bit of background, and then like a couple of ideas of things that students might be involved in, things that I'm working on right now that could conceivably be of interest. So nano zero-valent iron and sulfidization. All right, so nano zero-valent iron, these are iron metal, zero valent iron, that means iron metal, very small particles, and those are highly reactive toward various suite of environmental contaminants. It turns out that this plot, a plot that I probably shouldn't put on there because it takes too long to explain. But this is a plot of a rate constant under sulfidization. So this is applying hydrogen sulfide to the nano zero valent iron. So this is a rate constant with the sulfidization. And this is a rate constant without the sulfidization. The important symbols on here are these blue ones. And the main point is that with sulfidization, the zero valent iron, the nano zero valent iron, is something like 20 times more reactive. It's a lot more reactive with sulfidization than without. But there's a potential problem there, or just generally a potential problem with nano zero valent iron, in that when applied in aqueous systems, it's so reactive that it can just react with the water instead of the contaminant. So there's been a lot of interest lately in sulfidization because, in addition to making the material more reactive with contaminants, it also protects against premature corrosion with the water. So that's shown over here. So this is nano zero valent iron, not sulfidized, generated hydrogen, meaning just corroding and reacting with water rather than contaminant. And then this is with the sulfidization, so there's less hydrogen generation. So this is background. This is something, basically, this is from papers that are either out or about to come out. Here's a little bit of new work that somebody could be involved in. I think would be interesting. So I've been kind of pioneering a little bit, at least in this field, something called shared parameter fitting. And the idea there is that if we have lots and lots of data, like here's a screen capture from a program that I use for data analysis, and there's a lot more graphs down here. So with lots and lots of data from lots and lots of experiments, the typical thing that we've been doing is just fitting models to those data and then trying to make graphs of the fitted parameters versus some other feature of the data in some way. But there's a more sophisticated way to do this, and that is to try to identify parameters in a model. Like here's a model down here. Identify parameters that ought to be shared. We think they might be shared, meaning have the same value, in lots and lots of different experimental situations, and then analyze the data under that premise. So this is a kind of an interesting idea. Seems to have some definite value, but there's a problem with it, and that's trying to figure out which set of shared parameters actually is supported by the data. And I have this idea to pursue something called information theoretic model selection. It sounds really mathematical, and there's some deep math underneath it, but the application of it isn't actually that mathematical. So something that would be accessible to a freshman student. Another thing that somebody could do as by way of new work would be to combine some of the things that Dr. Bill does with biological sulfate removal, which forms hydrogen sulfide. This is a graph showing that. Here's hydrogen sulfide. And use that as a way to sulfidize nano zero valent iron. It's going to be more of like an experimental exercise. Right. So that's the first kind of active area for me. That's probably my most active area right now. The next area of active that's on active end is acid mine drainage in limestone. So here's some background. This is data from that some students collected a few years ago, where they put acid mine drainage in limestone in a bucket, and then measured like alkalinity and pH. And of course, the pH goes up. The thing that I'm interested in is that the pH, just kind of almost across the board, whenever anyone does this, doesn't actually go up that much. So if you take water and just put it with calcite and do the equilibrium speciation calculations, the pH is much, much higher. So, and it's not because of the metals. That's not the issue here. I don't think it is. And this is really kind of related maybe to the talk that Bob Hedden gave with that alkanator and the role of dissolved CO2. So if you were here in the seminar last term, you heard a talk by Bob Hedden where he had this simple experimental device, just a syringe with a bag of limestone in it, and he would suck up water and make measurements on it. So even before he came, I was working on a little bit of a project in using Freak inside of Python, essentially trying to kind of like predict that alkanator experiment, the results of that alkanator experiment. So these are only details of these results. They have something to do with how much the pH goes up and how much the alkalinity goes up as a function of the amount of CO2 that's present in the water beforehand. So somebody could be helping me either work up the computational side of this, or could be doing could be applying Hedden's alkanator in a way to try to test this little modeling exercise. All right, then the third area where I'm active, fairly active right now, is on this matter of chemical weathering. So chemical weathering, what I'm talking about there is rock, bedrock, interacting with water, undergoing dissolution, precipitation reactions. And that's the way in which bedrock gets turned into soil, or the saprolite, or the inorganic content of the soil. So here's we call this a weathering front. So this is bedrock down here. And then as you go up the soil column, you get more and more degraded bedrock. So like the rock is kind of scaly here. You can break it apart with your hand. And up here it's soil. But there's still rocks left over. This is a rock. It's just floating up to the top. This is the same idea in kind of a cartoon. Okay, so it might be possible. So these are some data from neutron scattering experiments. It might be possible to track that weathering process just by looking at the what's called the fractal dimension of the surface. So this is a plot of fractal dimensions extracted from these neutron scattering data as a function of depth in a soil column. There seems to be some dependence, some signal there that's tracking how the weathering process is occurring. This is of interest because we can't really observe weathering in real time. Weathering takes this happens over geologic timescales. So we can go out and see that weathering has happened and measure the properties of the weathered material, but it's in some way integrating the history of that weathering system over time. But we can never see it actually happen in real time. So it's very difficult to extract reliable kinetics on these weathering systems. So the idea is that maybe this fractal dimension gives us another tool that we can look at to understand what happened in the past to this rock. So this is what I'm doing on this right now. So this is a fairly old paper where someone was doing some simulations of like a dissolution process, computer simulations, and I was looking at this paper and realized, oh, this is a fractal. So somebody had done a bunch of different simulations under a certain different parameter. And I recognized, like, oh, okay, there's a fractal, and there's a different fractal dimension in each one of these simulations. So lately, I wrote basically my own code to do those same simulations. I can make a color in mine. I'm sure they could too, just didn't put that in there. And then I started extracting fractal dimensions. And I do have some kind of signal. So again, we'll go into the details of this, but we can calculate fractal dimension over different simulations with different setups. And I have some kind of signal, but it's you can just tell looking at this, it's not like real smooth. This is a modeling study, so it's not like data that I'm collecting. So it's not, these aren't scattered, this is more like error that's in here. So what I could use here is I could use someone who would help me set up some more sophisticated simulations on larger computers. So that's another thing that I'm working on. And if it was of interest, this would be the project that would be going. Right. So that's my work, my current snapshot of my current work. Turn it over to
so my primary field of study is in microbial fuel cells. I'm going to give you a little bit of background into the technology, and hopefully convince you that they're as cool as I think. All right, so we're working on this fundamental principle. We often, when we talk about energy, we talk about energy production, but really we all need to remind ourselves, whoops, that we're not ever producing energy, right? We're converting it. Okay? So I might speak in terms of production, but we're really talking about energy conversions, all right? So here we're converting energy from wood into heat and light. We can also convert energy ourselves from food into all the things that we want to do. And my little bacteria friends also like to convert energy from food sources into all sorts of different things that bacteria like to do. For some reason, I'm having a little trouble. So with bacteria, we can convert not only from the kinds of things that we like to eat, but from all sorts of other energy sources. And particularly, we're talking about organic matter. And it's applicable to environmental engineers because there's organic matter that we waste. It's energy, but it doesn't really do anything for us in all sorts of processes. So there's food production that produces a wastewater that has organic matter in it. Manure and other sorts of wastewaters like that have a lot of energy inherent in them that we don't do anything productive with. In fact, we expend a lot of energy in order to get that organic matter out of these waters. Computers are having some trouble. Sorry. So we also, of course, in our own wastewater, municipal wastewaters, there's energy inherent in these waters that right now doesn't do us any good. And one of sorry. So we want to use our bacteria to see if we can get something interesting for us, beneficial for us, out of those wastewaters. Right now, in treating wastewater, we use a lot of microbes. And the microbes consume the food, the organic matter in the wastewater, and convert it to carbon dioxide. What we want to do is see if through that conversion process, we can extract a little of the energy from it. So I like to think about energy in terms of waterfall, for example. So there's energy in food, and we eat it, and we respire carbon dioxide. And bacteria do the same thing. They also consume food and respire carbon dioxide. Through that conversion of energy, nothing useful is available to us. We can't take our plugs and plug them into a wastewater treatment plant, even though it's full of energy for bacteria, but not energy for us. We can't right now anyway put it into a vehicle and run a car on the energy inherent in wastewaters. And so the technology that I mentioned, microbial fuel cells, can do this for us. So it can convert waste carbohydrates into an energy form that's useful to us. In this case, it's electricity. This is a relatively new technology. It's really been in the current scientific field since about 2004. We've understood some of these capabilities that bacteria have a lot longer than that, but really it's only been since 2004 that the field has taken off as a potentially viable way to convert energy in waste materials into something useful for us. So we have this food source, wasted organic matter, we have bacteria, and the electrons are really what we're talking about here. So when bacteria consume food, they use the energy inherent in the electrons and eventually dump them with the production of carbon dioxide. So what we do in a microbial fuel cell is essentially interrupt that process by introducing a circuit. So similar to a battery, we have an anode and a cathode. And so yeah, like I said, similar to a battery. And in this case, the electrons now are available to the bacteria, only they get part of the energy out of them, and then we get the rest of it in the circuit. So I've really been talking only about one part of the whole system. I've been talking about the conversion of carbohydrates to carbon dioxide, and that's the oxidation process. But in order to have a complete circuit, we've got to have the whole thing. So we need oxidation and we need a reduction reaction. In our cells, in a lot of bacterial cells that are considered aerobic bacteria, we convert carbohydrates with oxygen to water and carbon dioxide, and we get energy out of this. So when we do that, we have the whole battery, essentially. We have both parts of the cycle. So we've got this bacteria, and he's eaten his delicious wastewater hamburger and produced carbon dioxide and some electrons. So what is it going to do with those electrons? Well, it's got a couple of choices. In natural systems, the electrons are used to reduce the oxygen molecule to water. So that's what's happening in all of your bodies right now. It's what happens in wastewater treatment plants as they currently operate, is that we give the bacteria the food, and we give ourselves the food, and the electrons, after they've been used to generate energy, convert then oxygen into water. If we introduce a circuit into a microbial fuel cell, for example, if we show these bacteria a different place to dump electrons, then it's possible for us to convince them to give the electrons not to oxygen, but to an anode. And as long as the anode is in a circuit, the electrons can pass through the circuit to the cathode, and it's there at the cathode where the oxygen gets reduced to water. So not in the bacteria itself, but actually at the cathode. And once we have electrons in a circuit, we have current, and so we are generating electricity. And we actually have been successful at doing this in laboratories all over the world as well as here. And so I know this is a little bit hard to see, but there's an LED that is not where the electricity is not coming from any other source except for microbes consuming organic matter and reducing the anode instead of reducing oxygen. The bacteria that are capable of doing this are not actually that rare. They're ubiquitous in nature. There's one or two particular species that are really good at it, but those guys are also found everywhere. When we build a microbial fuel cell, we don't have to add any special bacteria to the wastewater. We just use wastewater, and these guys are there. They tend to then dominate the community that grows on these anodes and in these systems, the ones that are particularly good at the job, but we don't have to do anything special to find them. There are systems out there where instead of using the electricity, the electrons generated from microbial consumption of organic matter to reduce oxygen to water, if we take the oxygen out, we can actually generate hydrogen gas by reducing protons with those electrons. And there are a number of other different kinds of things that can happen in these systems. So that's all I want to say about that, except for a brief message about the kinds of things we're working on. So you can imagine these systems are quite complex. There's an anode, there's a cathode, there's a circuit, there's bacteria, there's wastewater. And so there are all these different avenues that we can approach the system from. My particular background is in the biology of the systems, but I'm pretty wide open, and right now actually exploring some different avenues. So Grace is going to talk a little bit about one of those. And the other one that we're working on right now is looking at the way that magnets, just a static magnetic field, can influence the power output of the systems and their speed at starting up. So it takes a while for the bacteria to get going when you build one of these things. It's possible to slow that, or to speed up to shorten that time frame by introducing magnets to the system. So those are just a couple of things that we're looking at right now. So I will turn it over to Grace.
Oh, can I go first, actually? I have lab at 3.
Yeah, sure.
Oh, sorry.
Lowe's are good for that sequence.
Why?
I'm Gabby, and I'm going to talk to you about my internship with the Army Corps of Engineers that I've been doing for the past 2 summers and 2 winter breaks. So I'm going to go over the history of the Army Corps of Engineers, what I did, and your possible future experiences. We call it USACE, which just stands for U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. So it originally started with George Washington, who created it in 1775, and they were mainly for, they were war engineers, so they helped with a lot of the war stuff. And around after the Revolutionary War was when it kind of dwindled down, and there weren't too many of them anymore. And then it reformed in 1815, which was when they started working on the water systems and navigation and all that. And they were actually the first engineering firm in the U.S. So there's 9 different divisions, and that's all across the United States, and there's 45 different districts. So Pittsburgh district is the one that I work at, and we oversee 23 locks and dams, 16 reservoirs, and 42 local flood protection projects. And so our district is over PA, West Virginia, Ohio, Maryland, and New York. So I know this map is kind of blurry, but we're the western part of Pennsylvania, the bottom portion of New York, a little bit of Ohio, I think it's a larger portion of West Virginia, and then a tiny little sliver of Maryland. So, background of what I did, I worked for the hydraulics and hydrology department, and I also worked for the water quality department. So those are just tiny branches of a bigger section called the water resources branch. So hydraulics is just the study of taking a quantity of runoff and turning it into a flood level, and hydrology is the study of transforming rainfall or precipitation into the quantity of runoff. So as an intern for the Army Corps of Engineers, since it is a government job, I'm not allowed to mention a lot of stuff. So there's a lot of stuff I don't have access to either because I'm only an intern. But the plus side is, as an intern for the Army Corps of Engineers, you get a lot of free lunches. So this is my work that I did for the H&H section. So this is the cool intern work. I worked with 2 different types of dams. So I worked with a fixed dam and a gated dam. A fixed dam is just used for navigation mainly, and it just controls the water to make sure it's high enough for boats to get through. And a gated dam is controlling the water levels downstream, upstream of the dam. So the picture on the left, that's a fixed dam, that's at Braddock. Braddock's actually one of the dams on the Monongahela River. So that's one of them I did little projects for. And then the one at the top over here is Hannibal, which is on the Ohio River, and that's a gated dam. So some of the software I used was HEC RAS, HEC HMS, HEC DSS, and HEC SSP. So each of them stand for, RAS stands for River Analysis System, HMS Hydraulic Modeling System, DSS Data Storage System, and SSP is Statistical Software Package. So you'll do HMS and RAS with Dr. Bandstra later on as a senior. So that was pretty cool. I got to do some stuff with work there, and then also in my section we learned a lot about HMS with Dr. Bandstra. And actually at my work, in the H&H section, they're starting to try to make us learn more about HMS, which is pretty cool. So I did some frequency analysis at Ord City, which is kind of closer to the top of the map that I showed you. So I also made hydrographs, mainly on Excel. Wasn't too fancy, but they worked for what we needed them to. And I did those for they were improving lock and dam projects. And so I just made the hydrographs so they would know like different parameters they needed to make sure that the locks and dams met. And I also worked at Oil City because they have a lot of ice jams there. So this is my water quality work that I did. So a lot of stuff that I did for water quality is the same things that I did as Measurements 1, except I got to be on a boat all day. Usually it was pretty nice. It was a little cold the first time I went out, but after that it was terribly hot. So I don't know if you guys know what a Secchi disc is, but it's this little round disc and it's like cut into 4 sections and it's black and white and opposite. And you just put it down into the water to see like the turbidity of the water. So I got to use one of those, and then they have a giant YSI, it's literally like this big, that you have to hold over the side of the boat because there's no really fancy way to hold it while you lift it up and measure different parameters at different heights of the water. And so my most recent project was taking all of our data books from 2013 and just logging them all into Excel. So, yep. And then, so possible intern work for you, that's the website, usajobs.gov. And they're always looking for interns there. So if you just search engineering intern, there's engineering interns all over the US. So you'll find one. And then if you also get an internship there, all their interns actually get hired after they graduate. So that's the kind of cool thing with my job is that I'll have a job right after I finish college.